It's 900 hours Central African time. A very well good morning to you. Welcome to Media Monitor. Well, we're coming to you live from our Auckland Park studios right here in Johannesburg. My name is Siphiwo Nzawumbi. Well, once again, we'll bring you your weekly top stories and of course accompanied by analysis. But first, let's have a look at the top stories of the day. President Jacob Zuma has pledged that South Africa will continue to play a major role in peacekeeping initiatives across Africa. He was speaking at the Ubuntu Awards ceremony in Cape Town yesterday. African People's Convention leader Themba Godi says today's leaders should use dignified personalities such as Robert Sobukwe to check whether they are on track or not. The European Union representative on foreign affairs says the international community is facing a moment of truth regarding the war in Syria. Let's now look at some of the front pages on our Sunday newspapers. Sunday Times leads with a story about Vantage Goldfields Lily Mine disaster. City Press leads with the headlines about ANC MPs backlash after President Jacob Zuma's decision to pay some of Ingandla costs. The Weekend Argus leads with a story about Mandela's grandson, Mandla, appealing for tolerance of his religious choices. Sunday Tribune also leads with Mandela's conversion to Islam. And Sunday Independent leads with local government elections which have been rescheduled for August to give political parties time to canvass. But first, before we delve into our discussion, let's quickly go for this ad break. We'll be back.
I would say to the students at Fort Hare in 2016, please heed this example. Let it be an inspiration to you as you pursue not just a degree, but a life of learning. Respect the education offered to you at the university. Show respect to your lecturers and professors. A university education is the beginning of your destiny.
We are so thrilled as a family that Fort Hare continues to be a site of celebration of this history and record.
We believe that Fort Hare has a legacy to live up to and a future to reimagine within the African continent and the global south as it looks forward to being the alma mater of the next generation of Africa's leaders.
Makamelo Sekhuntse, one strong woman who said no to hunger. She never allowed circumstances to pull her down. At daybreak, she is up and running in the streets of Johannesburg to make her living. After 12 hours of hard work, she goes back home being able to put food on the table. Join me, Bule Molebatsi, on your show about those who take on and conquer life challenges every Saturday at 5:30.
Well, welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. For your views, highly appreciated right here in the show. So please make sure that you go and check our handle. That is at SA Media Monitor. Now, I'm honored to kick off the show with political analyst, Professor Dinyeko Maluleka. And in our Cape Town studios, we're joined by Sowetan editor Mpumelelo Mkhabela, as we'll be discussing some of your top stories of the week. Professor, let's welcome you. Thank you so much for joining us on Media Monitor.
Thank you very much.
Mpumelelo in Cape Town, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Media Monitor.
Good morning, thank you.
All right. Let's perhaps start. We have the stories that have made headlines in today's newspapers. Inside the Sunday Times, page 2, DAMP Gladys Breitenbach is expected to hand herself over to Kgosi Mampuru's second prison tomorrow. This follows a legal battle, or rather long legal battle, relating to charges and also some of defeating the ends of justice. What are your expectations on this one, Professor? What do you think rather prompted the DAMP to go?
Well, I think it's an admission that she did delete those files. I think it is bad news for the DA, politically speaking. It looks like things never stop for the DA because now they have another member who not only is being accused but is willing to hand herself over. It will be interesting to see how the DA handles this one and whether it is a throwing in of the towel or simply the next tactic. It's something that we'll have to watch. Right. But whichever way you look at it, it is bad for the DA, and the DA has had to cope with prominent members, wayward prominent members. Yeah. And this is a valuable one for them in terms of who she is and where she comes from. And the matter, of course, is a vexatious one, as you have rightly said.
All right, let's come to you, Mpumelelo. The DA is standing by its MP. What are your views?
Well, there's a bit of a difficulty here. There are two issues that I want to highlight. One is that Breitenbach seems to argue that the NPA is vindictive because of the cases that the DA has been taking to court, including the case against Nomgcobo Jiba. You know, the DA has been arguing for some time that given the adverse comments that judges have made against Nomgcobo Jiba, one of the deputy directors at the NPA, she should be charged or suspended. So Breitenbach seems to suggest that all of this action against her is because of the DA and her own views around Nomgcobo Jiba and some of the things that have been happening at the NPA. The second point is that perhaps it may have been advantageous for the DA to have Breitenbach as spokesperson on justice and on NPA matters. But coming to think of it properly, it may have been ill-advised that somebody who has worked at the NPA, knows the intricacies of the NPA, and had been part of some of the machinations in the NPA, then became spokesperson on NPA matters for the opposition. So to a certain extent, this draws closer, it highlights the extent to which there are actually a lot of conflicting matters here. So all of these issues would obviously be put out in the public domain, but should she go ahead and be prosecuted. But
just talking about support, Mpumelelo, we didn't see the same support from the DA when it came to King Dalindyebo. Why would it be so?
Well, in the case of Dalindyebo, remember that he was found guilty by a court of law, and he appealed. At the time when he was recruited to the DA or joined the DA, he was appealing the matter at the Supreme Court of Appeal. It's only after the Supreme Court of Appeal confirmed the judgment of the High Court that indeed he committed those crimes that the DA kind of dumped him. Okay. And didn't support him. In the case of Breitenbach, she has not been found guilty by any court of law, but she was charged internally in the NPA, and now she is going to be charged criminally.
All right, now let's have a look at page 2 of the Sunday Times. Education Minister elected a ministerial committee to investigate discriminatory and racist texts and pictures that may be contained in school textbooks. Prof, we didn't see this one coming. What could have prompted this commission specifically?
The question is, why so late? I mean, 21 years since democracy, these textbooks have been in circulation. And now we realize that some of them may contain images and narratives even that are racist. So I think that for me is the first concern. It's not a bad thing what the minister is doing because we need to do all we can to ensure that racism doesn't spring surprises on us. I mean, it keeps springing surprises on us. We think it's fast asleep, and then we realize it's sitting next to us as a nation.
But what's the commission most likely to look at?
No, but you see, let me tell you what is wrong with this. What is wrong with this is that it seems to me that we continue to look for little illustrations of racism here and there. We're not looking at its structural manifestations, because racism, in as much as it lives in textbooks and it lives in people, it actually lives in structures. That's where it thrives. And once it is embedded in structures, no one needs to do anything.
Does that mean we have to disassemble the structures, perhaps?
I think that this task team should do more than just look at textbooks. Look at the structural arrangements in education and basic education in general, and not just at the textbooks, because the textbooks are just a small little area where these things are happening.
All right. Bumilelo, just quickly, your views on this matter. The Prof right in studio says we have to look at racism within the structures. What do you think?
No, well, I wouldn't say the textbook is a small little matter. Actually, I think it's a big matter, because it was through education that the system of racism was entrenched in the psyche of both the victims and the perpetrators of the system of apartheid. You'll remember that long before apartheid, in the early days of the colonial era, it was perpetrated through these race theories. Yeah. A lot of them are actually found in textbooks to justify that certain people are inherently inferior and certain people are inherently superior based on the skin color. So the issue of textbook is quite a big issue. We shouldn't underestimate it.
All right. Let's move on to another story, gentlemen. The Sunday Times, Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa says the ongoing review of state-owned enterprises will go a long way in rooting out the capture of government's institutions by politically connected individuals for their personal gain. Prof, we also heard this being addressed in the State of the Nation address. What do you think could have prompted this, especially this view specifically?
Yeah, look, it is important to hear someone like Ramaphosa say this. And under normal circumstances, this would be a normal statement to make, which we should welcome normally. But we know that one of the persons alleged to be implicated in this is the very president of the country. And that is what makes this statement a lot more loaded than it looks. And so everyone who listens to this will ask themselves, okay, we hear this, but how are you going to deal with it at that level? And not just at the level of people lower down? And how are we doing at that level, given the recent Concord hearing and so on? So I think it's a step in the right direction, but it is an issue that in which the entire government is mired, given the allegations surrounding the head of state.
Wow. Mpumelelo, state-owned enterprises, what do you think? Interesting one from Deputy President.
It is indeed. And I think that the important thing here is the admission that there is a problem. For a very long time, the issue of political connections being used as a method to get through lucrative deals in state-owned enterprises had been denied officially. Now that at the highest level, it's being admitted by the Deputy President of the Republic, that's a good start, because it means something will be done. And I think it also comes at a time when, because the President had been linked to some of these issues, and at the moment, as we can all see, he's at his weakest point. So it allows room and space for those who have always had a different view to come in and address these concerns. And of course, as you'd remember, that the Deputy President was actually appointed by President Zuma himself to go sort out all the problems in state-owned enterprises. But we did not know that he could actually go to the nerve of the issue and deal with it, precisely because he was appointed by President Jacob Zuma.
But what on the ground is quite a controversial statement coming from him, especially being known as a businessman himself.
Yes, and he would know what is required in running companies proper. He's stressing in the interview that he wants a strong corporate governance rules. Political connections should not be the order of the day. People shouldn't get unfair or fair advantage because of their political connections. And that's the right statement to make. And I think that's the kind of statement that if leaders of state-owned enterprises are listening, will begin to act and behave appropriately. Because it's important for government to set the tone. Sometimes it's just about the tone, the impression that you give to those that are leading these entities. If you give the right impression, people, they will tend to behave correctly because they know you don't tolerate corruption, you won't tolerate looting and that kind of stuff.
All right, gentlemen, let's hold it right there for now. Well, you are still watching Media Monitor right here on SABC News Channel 404. We're discussing some of the leading top stories and, of course, headlines. Media Monitor will continue after this. Do stay with us.
I have met with almost all the stakeholders. In fact, I've met with all the mining companies, their CEOs, the unions, all of them. Introduced myself, assured them that I'm having an open door policy. If they have issues that they believe we're not doing, let them talk to me directly, we'll help them. We have also talked to them in terms of what we view as urgent government policy, transformation in the sector, worker treatment, issues of safety. We have placed them firmly in our agenda, and we have assured them that issues like stability in the sector, policy certainty, continuing with research are the issues that we are taking seriously and will place them high on the agenda of the department, and that is what we are doing currently.
Well, welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor right here on SABC News Channel 404. Now, let's go to page 2 of the City Press. Government is set to scrap certain clauses of the Tax Amendment Act to appease Labour Federation COSATU, which made threats to withdraw support for the ANC in the upcoming local government elections. Some have been saying it's a stunt, Prof. Just approaching the elections, it won't really materialize. What do you think?
Well, it could well be a stunt, but I think what it says also is how much on the back foot government is at the moment. I mean, the president explained this in terms of him having signed without understanding that there were any problems, which is very bad for the president to say, because it gives the impression that the president just signs, that he doesn't apply his own critical review of what he signs. But I think it is a government certainly that is giving an olive branch to its alliance partner COSATU, but it's a government on the back foot. And I think it's also an attempt to deal with the possible mass resignations from people who are trying to cash their pensions and the effect of that. But whichever way you look at it, this is a government that can be bent at the moment. In other words, you can bend it the way you want. And I don't know what it means. I mean, it might mean people will make more and more demand and hope to get their way. This is a government that can be pushed. But whether this is the end of the matter between government and COSATU, one will have to wait and watch.
All right, Mpumelelo, word on the ground was the issue with this particular amendment is the fact that it has not been properly communicated with those who are going to benefit or rather be affected by it. What do you think?
I think the biggest problem here is the process of lawmaking in Parliament. You would remember that the former Speaker of the National Assembly, Max Sisulu, once commented in one of the debates in Parliament that there is a lot of legislation that gets passed, and within a short space of time, it comes back to Parliament. Parliament has to amend it, even before it gets fully implemented, which means that some pieces of legislation are not properly thought out before they are passed by Parliament and they have to be signed by the President. Now, that's bad for our Parliament, because Parliament is supposed to have all the capacity to do research and to collect views and to have to listen to everybody who's interested in a particular legislation before a legislation is passed. So now, it gives the President a bad kind of image, because he looks like he doesn't know what he's doing, because he was ill-advised into signing a law where he says he didn't know that there was so much opposition and he didn't know that there were such controversial clauses in there. Now, that's very bad. But the problem stems not only from him. It stems from the way Parliament hears people out, the extent to which it's able to solicit all views before it passes legislation. That, I think, it's the problem. It's not this act only that has been returned to Parliament after a short space of time, even before implementation. There's been other laws before.
All right. Now, page 2, Sunday Independent. Owners of Vantage Goldfield Lily mines have decided to compensate the families of the trapped miners with 200,000 rands, and the survivors will receive 50,000 rands. What kind of, is this perhaps a peace offering, or rather, is this a way, there's word on the ground that the government perhaps is saying that they're giving up on rescuing those who are trapped inside with this kind of compensation. What do you think?
Yeah, it looks like that. It looks as if they have given up on the 3, at least, who are still trapped and now for more than a week. I don't know if this is the best move the mine could make at this time. Never mind the amounts. The very idea of offering money at this time, when the whole process has not come to an end, might feel a little out of taste with many people. And that's even before we look at the amount, because it seems to me that there is a lot more at stake than just money. And how do they come to these numbers that they have come to? I don't know if it doesn't show a lack of understanding of some of the other issues at stake here, if there is this quick resort to offering money. And I know that some people will discuss the amounts as well.
Mpumelelo, what do you think about this compensation? Prof here says he doesn't think it's a good or rather a wise step. What's your view?
Well, the company is caught in a catch-22 situation, because when people are put at risk like that and they die or get injured, society always wants to know what is it that people risk their lives for? And then people tend to go to look at how do the families of these people survive. So eventually people were going to find out that the families of these people live in poverty, notwithstanding the fact that their family members are working in life-threatening situations. So you can imagine that the company now would have been under pressure after having thought about those considerations to say, let's do something to these families so that we don't seem to be too cold, not seem to be uncaring. People are dying here, and the families are living in poverty. So that would have been a consideration, I think, in my opinion.
And I mean, it's been 9 days since the mine collapsed with 3 miners trapped. Another concern was that rather government has reacted a bit late. What do you think about that?
Well, what must happen immediately after an incident like this is that there's a whole lot of safety regulations that the government has to look at almost immediately. And these are well documented, and all mining houses should be aware of them. So I think what we should look at is whether the government reacted in terms of those laws, and whether the mining companies, the company itself, reacted in terms of that law. But that would require strong trade unions to hold both the government and the mining company to account to make sure that all safety regulations were followed, both in the rescue operation itself and even prior before the accident happened, whether there was any precautionary measures that were taken.
All right. Now, gentlemen, President Jacob Zuma delivered his State of the Nation address earlier this week. Here are some of the pointers of his speech. But first, let's have a look at this insert.
We all have a lot to do to turn the economy around and to cut wastage. We will go through a difficult period for a while. But when the economy recovers, we will be proud of ourselves for having done the right things. We have made an undertaking to spend public funds wisely and to cut wasteful expenditure. We also announced the reopening of land claims for people who had missed the 1998 deadline. The number of new land claims that have been lodged stood at close to 120,000 as of December last year. We appeal to business again that retrenchments should not be the first resort when they face difficulties.
Interesting points by President Jacob Zuma there in his State of the Nation address. Mpumelelo, let's rather start with this one with you. What are your highlights about the speech throughout?
Well, I think the president tried hard to impress on the nation that he cares about the state of the economy and that his government is trying hard to rescue it from the situation that it finds itself in, and that the government would try by all means to avoid a junk status credit rating. And as the president correctly pointed out, that a junk status would mean South Africa will have to pay more in interest for its loans. And because the economy is not growing, it does actually need, the government does need to go and borrow money. So he tried to say to the markets, please don't downgrade us. We are responsible with our finances. We are trying to live within our means. We are going to reduce all excessive and unnecessary expenditure. So that's what the market wanted to hear. And again, the president is at his weakest moment here. He had no option but to bend to accommodate the needs of the market, especially following the events of last year with the disastrous changes of finance ministers. So I think that from that point of view, he should be able to get a positive reaction. But of course, the credit rating agencies are still going to come and give feedback and say what they think about the president's speech.
All right.
So it is yet to be seen whether he will reap any fruits out of this accommodative stance. But people are also looking at his own conduct. Is he personifying the kind of fiscal stance that he spoke about in Parliament? So it's always going to be difficult for the president because people are always looking for is he the right person to say this given what we know? Is he going to be able to actually command cabinet to curb these excessive expenditures, given the fact that cabinet itself is said to be bloated according to other people? So we wait to see what the outcome will be in the end. I'm sure people are still digesting it.
Okay.
A lot of the work is still going to come from the finance minister.
Okay, let's hold it right there.
Carries through the work of the.
Let's hold it right there. Let's just give the Prof a chance. Prof, a lot of economists have been saying that the speech is unlikely enough to restore confidence in South Africa and convince rating agencies not to downgrade the country's credit rating. Mpumelelo did touch or make mention of that. It seems like a scenario of right words coming from the wrong horse.
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem because people will ask whether the president himself is an embodiment of these things that he speaks about. They're definitely going to ask that. But you know, in my view, a State of the Nation address under normal circumstances is that moment when the nation gets to know where it stands, but gets inspiration, an injection of confidence for the people, but also in terms of the positioning of the country in relation to others. And I am not sure that we succeeded to do that in this year when we needed it more than any other year, because of the economic problems that we have, because of the drought, because the threat of the junk status, because of the questions around the person of the president, and the conduct of parliament, if you want to add, given the recent concord. So there are a lot of issues that undermine confidence.
But the point is about cost cutbacks could have made his a speech rather interesting or rather flowery. Some may think.
Could have been bolder. Let's put it that way. It could have been bolder. There could have been more bold measures than just to say that
cutting flights and entertainment.
Precisely. It could have gone deeper. But I still think when you assess the State of the Nation address, you've got to assess it in the context of where we are now and all the questions that I'm talking about. You've got to assess it in terms of what was going on outside of Parliament 2 hours, 3 hours before it happened. All of it together did not inspire confidence, in my view.
Wow, that's Professor Tinigo Malulega saying that the speech, State of the Nation address, did not inspire change on him. What do you think? Let us know. Our Twitter handle is @MediaMonitor, or rather @SA Media Monitor. After the break, more stories about what gripped the news, or rather the headlines this week. Stay tuned.
So often I can find work drawing water for people for $1. I buy sugar so the children can drink boiled leaves as tea. When we can't find work, we often spend the day without eating. Since it rained, though, we cook army worms for lunch. We never have maize meal for lunch. We keep that for dinner. She says the World Food Programme was here, but of the 120 families in this area, they chose 20. We didn't qualify.
All of our chickens died in the heat wave. And we planted maize last week when the rains arrived, but we doubt we'll be able to harvest anything.
Well, welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor right on SABC News Channel 404. Remember that I said you can be a part of us right in studio by sending us your views on Twitter. The Twitter handle is @SA Media Monitor. Now, moving right along into other stories on the continent. After years of conflict and 4 presidential postponements, and people of a Central Republic, or rather Central African Republic, CAR, will finally choose a new president today. While Ugandans will cast their vote for a new leader next week on the 18th of February. Prof, what do you think of this one?
Well, the Central African Republic has been in instability and conflict for a while. I mean, if you want to go back to a year, you could say 2012. It burst into our newsrooms in South Africa 2012, 2013, when our soldiers got caught in that conflict there. And ever since, the country has really never known peace, with factions emerging, mainly around Muslim and Christian loyalties. So it's a country that has been now run by an acting president. The change of regime that occurred in 2013 did not last, and that's instability. So I really think we should all be crossing fingers that they are able to see these elections through, and that there is stability at the level of the presidency. At least there's still a lot of work for whoever gets elected as president to do, to bring back calm and normality to that troubled country.
All right, Mpumelelo, African elections are marred by violence, and there are worrying concerns that the Ugandan elections might be clouded with violence. What are your views on that?
Well, the Ugandan elections have never been peaceful. The issue of violence, coupled with the fact that Uganda has been basically what one can call authoritarian democracy under Museveni, now fighting for the 11th term, if I'm not mistaken. And you still want to tell people that you can still make improvements that you wouldn't have made in the last 11 terms of occupying office. So it's a bit of a problem, especially since they changed the presidential system to allow for unlimited term for the president. But there seems to be interesting signs that we might have an interesting election, especially if you look at the fact that there have been two presidential debates, public presidential debates. The first one, of course, Museveni ducked it. And then last week, he participated in the presidential debate, I think for the first time that he appeared on public television, debating issues with his fellow competitors. So it will be interesting to see if perhaps that kind of a debate is taken up even by ordinary people. They accept that it's a normal competitive elections and that the elections will be free and fair, and therefore there's no need for violence. But I'm afraid the way Museveni dominates that country, he's probably going to ram through and win the election, and the authoritarian democracy will continue.
All right, let's move over to issues of independence. Wednesday marks 51 years since Gambians attained their independence after centuries under Britain's rule. Let's talk about the significance of these independence celebrations, Prof. Why are we still celebrating, especially, yes, independence is to be celebrated, but in Africa after so many years, is this perhaps an issue that should be on the top tier of the list?
It's a big deal. Independence is a big deal for African countries. Independence is a big deal for all countries in the world. So I think there is nothing wrong with us celebrating independence. And certainly for a small nation like the Gambia, which gives truth to the saying that small can be beautiful. It's a small country, very small population, stuck between, if I remember well, I think it's between Senegal and the sea, as it were. Yeah. It has been relatively peaceful. I mean, there are problems. They've got some crazy people becoming presidents from time to time. But on the whole, I think the Gambia is a pretty peaceful state, and they have every reason to celebrate. Of course, also to try and meet the challenges that the citizens of that country are facing.
All right. Well, but just quickly, how would you define the present day in Zambia?
In Zambia or the Gambia?
In Gambia, rather, sorry.
The Gambia.
Yes.
Well, I think he's doing fine. I know that there were some stories about him making announcements that he can cure HIV and AIDS, I mean, which were bizarre. But I mean, such is the nature of some of these guys who are running our countries. But I think there is relative stability in that country. I happen to know a few colleagues who come from that country, and it seems to me that it is not going off the rails, at least.
All right. Now let's move over to our neighboring country, Lesotho. The SADC Commission of Inquiry into Lesotho recently released the much-awaited report in Parliament. But first, before we get into this particular story, let's have a look at this insert.
Report belongs to SADC and has to be publicized exactly as it is, no expansion of the report. So that's why we walked out of the Parliament when the Madam Speaker refused us off the point of orders. So we walked out of the Parliament and then we came back and disrupted the Parliament again.
But the governing coalition is not moved.
If they don't accept, that's the report. We have published the report. And the Prime Minister has tabled the report, and then the Parliament will decide. There's nothing we can do.
Well, joining us in studio to take us through the story is Ntakwana Nkhatane. And Ntakwana, thank you so much for joining us right here on Media Monitor.
Thank you.
Now, can you brief us or give us the highlights of this specific report?
Well, essentially what the report is about and what everybody seemed to be quite excited about was the fact that it recommended the removal of Army Commander Lieutenant General Tlhadik Amudi. It's one of the things that has made headlines in Lesotho. Also that no conclusive evidence was found towards the mutiny that Maha was supposed to be arrested for when he was subsequently shot and killed by his colleagues in the army. Also that Maha's appointment by former Prime Minister Tom Thabane was legal, and that the appointment of, or the reappointment of Lieutenant General Tlhadik Amudi was legal, but the removal or demotion of Mahau to a brigadier from Lieutenant General was flawed. So these are, I think, maybe the 5 key findings that people seem to be very interested in terms of the content of the report. Yes. But also, I think what maybe one can talk about is the reaction of the Prime Minister to the findings, because when he spoke in Parliament after the opposition had walked out demanding to know which parts of the report he had expunged, he said that the recommendations of that report were not binding orders and that they would be implemented as and when the Basotho people find it necessary and to the extent to which they find it necessary.
Why is that so? Why public consultation specifically on these recommendations?
Well, particularly he says that because this is an argument that has come from quite a long way since the commission itself was established. The commission, because it was taken to court, had to take a stand in terms of saying who it belongs to. Is it a SADC commission? Does it report to the Prime Minister? And the Prime Minister maintained that because it was constituted under the Lesotho Public Inquiries Act, it was a Lesotho commission that would report to him, but SADC maintained that it was a SADC commission because it was established, you remember, by the double troika on the 3rd of July before it started its work. So why it had to, why the question whether or not the recommendations are binding is, of course, the Prime Minister now saying that in terms of that Public Inquiries Act, it gives him the prerogative to take sections out of that report if he feels that they pose a security risk to the country, but also that the recommendations themselves, the country can decide whether or not, according to the Public Inquiries Act, to implement them.
Prof, your views?
Yeah, I think, you know, the importance of the army and army generals in Lesotho is a cause of concern. I mean, you can see that the issues revolve around this general and that general, and the tragic shooting to death of Mahau. I mean, it tells a story of something that we ought to be concerned about. There are also issues of so-called sovereignty. You know, is the AU or SADC able to intervene, and how far can they intervene? We've seen the AU being rebuffed in Burundi and sort of dumbing down their intended sending of peacekeepers. So it seems to have almost worked in Lesotho now with the kind of response we have received from the Prime Minister. But questions will remain as to what is the best kind of relationship, the balance between SADC and member states. What kind of interventions can SADC make when there are problems in a nation state? This I think has been a textbook illustration of those problems.
Well, quickly.
Yes, I think what Prof is saying is quite correct, because in that court case, when the judge handed down judgment, he actually said that the fact that there is a provision in the treaty that says SADC institutions have immunity in member states, because it is not legislated in the member country, does not actually give it that immunity when it comes to the courts. So that's an assignment, I guess, for SADC to ensure that the legislation or the provisions or the treaties are legislated in the member countries.
When I heard Prime Minister saying these recommendations are not binding, it sounded very familiar. Binding recommendations,
recommendations, and then binding at the same time. Pumelelo, what do you think in Cape Town specifically about those recommendations?
Well, I think that the release of the report to a certain extent demonstrates how effective SADC has been in the Lesotho matter. Because you'd remember that the Prime Minister of Lesotho did not want to release the report. And SADC leaders, in the last meeting they held in Botswana, the Troika leaders, they had to impress on him to release the report. And he actually didn't like the idea of being instructed what to do. So to me, it sounded like he wanted to have the cake and eat it by himself, because remember that it was through SADC that we were able to have some kind of stability in Lesotho. And it's through the SADC intervention that we have had elections that resulted in him taking over the role of Prime Minister. So now he should allow SADC to continue to supervise the situation. So I think the extent to which SADC was able to lean on him, and he eventually, now the report is now released, actually to a certain extent vindicates SADC's strategies, especially Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa and President Jacob Zuma's insistence that the matter be resolved in this way.
All right. Well, thank you so much. That was Mpumelelo was joining us now, Cape Town studio, and right here in Johannesburg, we're joined by Ntagwana Ngatane, who was keeping us up to speed with the situation in Lesotho currently. But right now, let's just quickly go for another ad break. Stay with us.
I find it difficult that chunks of money over years went to Sunday Times and Rapport and the Caxtons and the Star, and nobody raised an eyebrow. Not a single eyelid was raised about why is the government's chunks of money going. Those are private entities. They're not state-run enterprises, you know. And so when people talk in that way, the question I put is, what is exactly the problem? Is it again that maybe the price of the advertising from some of the ANN7 and TNA is less, so it's more attractive, you know, and that this is one of the fastest growing newspapers in the country? Is that the problem? Are they challenging again the old cabals? I, however, can say that in the history of our country, we've had media moguls who took decisions to downgrade the ANC, to call us terrorists, and some of the newspapers up to today. The Sunday Times is a case in point, clearly antagonistic to the state and to the government. Now, if you're a minister and you look at the Sunday Times criticizing you and insulting you on a daily basis, will you put your advertising in that newspaper? So maybe the media bosses must also begin to look at the environment within which they are presenting themselves, because there is a perception that why would you go to the Mail and Guardian when the Mail and Guardian's only role in this country right now is to make sure that the ANC gets a lesser percentage in any poll, as they said the last time. Why would any ANC-led minister want to put more money into something that's going to bring, it's freedom of speech, yes, but you know what, as long as the ministers are not breaking the law, as long as they're complying with three newspapers that get the adverts, what's wrong with that? Explain. I mean, the Sunday World, for instance, gets more advertising space out of the government than anyone else. Nobody talks about that. Why? Because the Sunday World is in the cabal. You see? So let's be quite frank about these things. It's not about, the perception is that the cabal is fighting any new entrant. Any new entrant. And we're saying this, please, more people, set up media houses. Let's challenge the old media regimes. Let's open the space for more South Africans to own media companies here in our country and not denigrate them when they do that.
Well, welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor right here on SABC News Channel 404. Now, Mpumelelo, let's come to you briefly. What do you think, or rather, what stories do you think will be dominating the media this week?
Well, I think the issue of Breitenbach will be a very a big story as the fights within the NPA get exposed, because Breitenbach and the DA, I think they will try hard to emphasize on the squabbles that are happening. You'll remember that even before the charges came to light of Breitenbach, there is a running story about Villiers of Meyer having put out an affidavit that is against Nomgcobo Chiba. So I think they will try and maximize their publicity around Breitenbach.
All right, Prof, which stories do you think would dominate?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that the Breitenbach story is going to be a big one. I think we are also going to start anticipating the budget speech, even though it is still, a week or more before it comes. I think we start anticipating it because it's really the big thing, the next big thing now after the State of the Nation address.
Ntagwana, which one?
Well, in Lesotho particularly, there is a prominent lawyer who was arrested on Friday night who's been representing soldiers accused of the same mutiny that Mahao was accused of. And arrested briefly, released on a court order. He's appearing in court on Monday for the charges, apparently something to do with perjury. So that is an interesting story. But also SADC reaction to the events in Parliament around the report, the SADC report. Are they happy with the way it has happened? I think we'll be looking at that as well.
That's an interesting one. It will be lovely to have a follow-up on that one. Well, to end off on a lighter note, what do you plan to get your loved one on this Valentine's Day? Well, for this Sea Otto who lives south of Tokyo, it was special treats in the Ice Hut Snacks. Well, that's how we end Media Monitor today. I wanted to ask how you guys are going to be spending your Valentine's Day, but let's spare the time and rather the details. Let me thank our studio guests for making time to be with us this morning. I'm Siphiwo Nzawumbi. This was Media Monitor. Have a good Sunday and a happy Valentine's Day. Till next time, it's goodbye.